She never saw the unraveling at first. It was quiet. It wasn't a thunderclap or a sudden storm. It was more like a slow leak. Fearless, a constant drip of herself being poured into places that never held her. She kept showing up, like always, wearing smiles that weren't hers, and saying yes when everything in her body whispered no. She thought that was strength. Staying, pleasing, holding it all together. But it was never strength. It was survival. And survival has an expiration date. She used to think tired was normal. Tired in her bones, in her voice, in her smile. But it wasn't just exhaustion. It was depletion, a slow forgetting of who she was before the world asked her to be everything else. She wasn't just tired. She was becoming a stranger to herself. Fearless. She couldn't remember the last time she laughed without holding back, cried without apology, or spoke without wondering how it would be received. Her mirror didn't lie. Her eyes had dimmed, not from age or time. Fearless, but from carrying the weight of everything that wasn't hers to hold. Some days, the world felt too loud. Even her own thoughts screamed in echoes, clashing with the quiet H-y in her chest. The H of missing a version of herself she hadn't met yet but knew was waiting. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped dreaming, not because the dreams weren't there, but because she couldn't find the space to believe him anymore. Life became checklists and compromises. Another day of getting through. Another night of pretending it was enough. People around her didn't notice, or maybe they chose not to. After all, she was always the one with the answers, the calm voice in chaos, the reliable shoulder. But who does the strong one call when she's the one falling apart? She became a master of disguise, painting over the cracks with lipstick and wit, performing joy in rooms where she wanted to disappear. She said, "I'm fine," like it was punctuation, not a plea. It wasn't one moment that broke her. It was all of them, called fearless, the unanswered texts, the overlooked effort, the conversations where her silence was louder than her voice. It was the mornings she woke up feeling like she had nothing left to give, and gave anyway. The nights she stared at ceilings, wondering if there was more than this. If she was more than this, she tried to push it down, to keep going, to fake her way back into the life she built, but it didn't fit anymore. Not the friendships rooted in obligation, not the love she kept begging to choose her, not the dreams she dimmed so others could shine. Nothing fit, because none of it was designed for the real her. Then one day, something small snapped. Maybe it was a forgotten birthday. Maybe it was just the way someone said her name without meaning. But it was enough. Enough to make her pause. Was enough to make her question why she was still holding on to pieces of a life that asked her to shrink. Enough to her make realize that surviving is not the same as living. And that was when the silence got louder than the noise. When her exhaustion no longer felt noble, it felt like a warning. When she stopped asking, fearless, what's wrong with me? And started wondering, what if nothing is? It didn't happen overnight. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Like the way seasons change, not with a bang, but with a quiet breeze brushing against your skin and reminding you that something is different. She didn't wake up with a lightning bolt revelation. It started when she stopped rushing to fill the silence, when she let it sit beside her, heavy and still. And in that stillness, something stirred. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't reach for her phone as soon as she woke up. She lay there, eyes open, just breathing, listening not to messages or missed calls or headlines, but to herself, her heartbeat, her thoughts, her needs. They were quiet, fragile things, needs she had buried under everyone else's for years. But there they were, whispering. She began to listen. There was a time when she only felt seen when someone else said she was called fearless, when compliments were currency and love was something she tried to earn. She gave so freely, hoping it would be enough, hoping someone would see her worth and reflect it back to her like a mirror she couldn't hold on her own. But mirrors can be liars when placed in the wrong hands. She realized that the validation she craved could never fill the hollowness of not choosing herself. She started asking different questions, not what do they want from me, but what do I want from me? Not how can I make this work, but does this even work for who I'm becoming? It felt selfish at first, but then it felt necessary. She'd been conditioned to associate selflessness with goodness, as if disappearing was a virtue, as if smallness was safety. But she was learning that shrinking didn't protect her. It only erased her. There was a soft rebellion blooming in her, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that quietly rewrote the script. She stopped over explaining. She stopped apologizing for her boundaries. She declined invitations that drained her. She took up space in conversations, in choices, in dreams. Fearless, she sat with the discomfort of disappointing others and learned it didn't kill her. In fact, it freed her. She reconnected with the voice inside her, the one she had once trusted before the world taught her not to. Fearless. That voice didn't shout. It hummed steady and sure. It spoke through intuition, through gut feelings. Fearless. Through the shiver she felt when something wasn't right. She realized she had always known, even when she pretended not to, which was fearless. That knowing had never left her. She had just stopped believing it. Old habits didn't fall away easily. She still had moments where she caught herself people-pleasing, doubting, dimming. But instead of spiraling, she paused. She noticed in fearless, and in that noticing, she reclaimed power. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be aligned with her truth, her values, her voice. Music felt different. Words felt sacred. Time alone became healing, not lonely. She found herself journaling again, not for clarity, but for connection. To see her thoughts laid out in ink, uncensored, was like meeting herself for the first time. And she liked who she met. She used to think that love meant saying yes. That kindness meant being available. That loyalty meant staying, even when it hurt. So she stayed. In conversations that drained her, in relationships that diminished her, in patterns that wrapped around her like chains made of soft fabric, just comfortable enough to forget they were holding her back. She believed if she just tried a little harder, bent a little more, proved her worth just one more time, called fearless, maybe they'd love her the way she needed. But there comes a moment when the soul gets tired of proving. It wasn't anger that changed her, it was clarity. A deep, aching clarity that came from years of compromising with people who wouldn't even meet her halfway, was called fearless. She looked around one day and realized her energy was scattered across places that didn't even remember her name when she wasn't giving. She was fearless. She was exhausted from being the glue in other people's lives while no one was holding her together. Fearless. Her giving wasn't generosity anymore. It was self-abandonment dressed in politeness. So she started drawing lines, not to push people away, but to keep herself from disappearing. She stopped responding to texts that only came when someone needed something. She stopped accepting apologies without changed behavior. She stopped allowing her silence to be taken as agreement. The first time she said no without explaining, her hands shook, but her soul sighed in relief. It was unfamiliar terrain. Fearless, this place where she put herself first, but something about it felt like home. Letting go wasn't clean. It never is. She mourned people who were still alive. She grieved the version of herself that was built for others. She walked away from spaces she used to beg to belong in, and it hurt. God, it hurt. Not because it was wrong, but because it was real. She realized that growth doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with loneliness, with awkward silence, with people calling you selfish for finally choosing yourself. But she kept going. Every time she honored her truth over her fear of losing someone, she got lighter. Every time she protected her peace over pleasing others, she got stronger. There was a sacredness in the solitude that followed. It wasn't emptiness, it was space. Space to breathe, to dream. Fearless, to hear her own thoughts, someone else's opinion echoing inside her. The more she let go, the more she became. She stopped pretending she was fine when she wasn't. She stopped performing happiness for the comfort of others. She stood in her wholeness, even when it made people uncomfortable. Especially then, she realized that some people only loved the version of her that was easy to swallow. Fearless, but she wasn't made to be palatable. She was made to be powerful. Her boundaries weren't walls. They were invitations for the right people to love her deeply, not conveniently, called fearless. For the kind of connection that didn't require her to shrink or soften her truth. For friendships that felt like safety, not strategy. For love that saw her. Not just the highlight reel, but the messy, moody, magnificent middle. She didn't come back with fire in her eyes or a loud declaration that she had changed. There were no dramatic speeches, no sweeping gestures. Her return to herself was not a performance. It was a presence, a still, steady kind of strength that spoke in glances, in choices, in the way she walked into a room without needing permission to exist. Power had always been within her, but now wasn't something she chased. It was something she carried. There was something different in her silence now. It wasn't laced with fear or submission. It was intentional. Peaceful. She didn't have to explain her worth or argue her value anymore. That kind of energy was for the girl she used to be, the one who thought being understood was the same as being loved, fearless. Now she understood herself, and that was enough. The noise around her faded because the voice within her had finally been turned up. She wore her growth like soft armor, not heavy, not defensive, but protective. She no longer needed to respond to every misunderstanding. She no longer felt the need to be liked by everyone in the room. Approval, Once her oxygen had become optional, and its place grew something richer, self-respect. She didn't move to prove anymore. She moved because it was right, because real, because it was aligned. There was a gentleness in her now. It's called fearless, but it wasn't weakness. It was the softness of someone who had nothing to prove and everything to offer. The softness of someone who had seen the edge fallen and gotten back up with grace in her step. She didn't need to shout to be heard anymore. Her presence was enough. Her stillness made people lean in. Her eyes held stories without needing to be told. She had found power in pacing herself. She no longer sprinted toward things that didn't match her energy. Fearless. She no longer begged for love in places that only gave it in crumbs. Her standards weren't sky high. They were grounded, airless. And anyone who couldn't meet her there simply wasn't invited into the sacredness of her new space. Not out of bitterness, but out of balance. She finally understood that not everyone was meant to go where she was headed. She became the kind of woman who could sit at a table alone and feel full. Fearless, who could walk away from something that once made her feel seen because now she saw herself more clearly. There was no rush to be understood, no panic to be chosen. She chose herself daily, quietly, relentlessly, in her rituals, in her rest, in her refusal to chase what didn't feel right. People began to notice, but not in the way they used to. It wasn't about compliments or curiosity. Fearless, it was the way she carried herself, like someone who had faced the storm and didn't need to talk about it to prove she survived. Called fearless. It was in the way her laugh returned, not loud but whole. In the way she held eye contact without flinching. In the way she honored her boundaries without apology. In the way she didn't just glow. She radiated. The changes weren't dramatic at first. They were quiet shifts, internal ones, barely visible to the outside world. But the energy around her began to transform one moment at a time. It was as if life had been waiting for her to arrive. Not the version she had been performing, not the one molded by expectations and fears, but the real her, the one rooted in truth, lit from within. And when she aligned with that version, and everything else began to move in rhythm, she noticed how certain doors closed without her having to push. People faded, conversations dried up. Fearless, invitations stopped coming from places that once consumed her. At first, it stung. There's a loneliness in shedding skins you wore for years. But as she stood in the emptiness, she realized it wasn't emptiness at all. It was space for the new, space for the real. And in that space, new people began to appear. People who saw her without needing her to shrink. People who spoke to her soul, not her insecurities. She stopped chasing, not out of pride, but out of peace. She had no interest in forcing connections that didn't flow. Fearless, she stopped explaining her boundaries to those who only understood versions of her they could benefit from. And oddly, life responded with abundance. The more she honored herself, the more aligned opportunities found her. The more she turned inward, the more the outer world mirrored back what she truly desired. Not everything came easily, but what did come felt natural, unforced, deeply right. She walked differently now, not with arrogance, but with groundedness. Fearless, she no longer asked for permission to exist in her fullness. the ripple of that energy touched every room she entered. People began to soften around her. Conversations shifted from small talk to soul talk. Strangers opened up to her without knowing why. It was her presence. Clear, honest, rooted, that invited authenticity in return. Old patterns attempted to resurface now and then. Tests came cloaked as comfort, called fearless. The universe has a way of checking if you've really learned. But this time, she saw them for what they were, echoes of a past she had already outgrown. And with every no spoken from her center, her yes to herself got stronger. She didn't flinch when saying goodbye. She didn't crumble when plans unraveled. She trusted that what left was never hers to begin with, and what was meant for her could never miss her. The ripple wasn't just external. Internally, her world expanded. Creativity returned in waves. She found herself dreaming again, wild, beautiful, unfiltered dreams. She started dancing alone in her kitchen, writing love letters to her future self, planting seeds without demanding the timeline for bloom. She laughed more, cried softer, lived slower. She learned that healing wasn't about fixing what was broken, fearless, but about remembering she was never broken to begin with. The more she honored her alignment, the more magnetic she became. Fearless, not in the way that turns heads, but in the way that turns hearts. People felt safer around her, not because she tried to please them, but because she was safe within herself. Her life no longer spun on approval or chaos. It moved with purpose, with meaning, with rhythm. She called fearless. She wasn't trying to be everything to everyone anymore. She was simply being, and that was everything. She didn't transform overnight, and she didn't need to. Her journey wasn't loud, but it was honest. She broke, she questioned, she let go, and she listened. She unlearned the noise of who she was told to be and slowly remembered who she truly was. Through the quiet courage of alignment, she found herself piece by piece, breath by breath, not in the approval of others, not in a perfect plan, but in her own steady becoming. She no longer chased a life, she embodied it. And in doing so, everything around her shifted, not because the world changed, but because she did.